Hi, everyone. Yes, we have general announcements up here. I am not David nor Linda, so I'm not fully prepped on all these things, but hopefully you read them and they're of interest to you. I know the Sustainability Lightning Talks are coming up after break, and the conferences in March, and all those great things. I'm Travis Blackmer. I'm here to present our day's talkers. So this introduction is a little bit long. My grandmother has taught me that if you think someone or someone's are kind of special, you should really embarrass them before they get a chance to talk. Tessa, Rosenberry, and David Saltonstall of ScrapDogs Community Compost have a background in zero waste and composting and education advocacy. During their time in New York City, the pair started a zero waste consulting organization and worked in various sustainability-related positions throughout the city. After considering their lifestyle and their desire to create stronger ties with the community, Davis and Tessa decided to come back to Davis's hometown of Camden, Maine, and work towards creating a food scrap collection and composting company. They made the move in spring of 2018 and announced ScrapDogs to the world in June. They knew midcoast was ripe with individuals that wanted to do better with their food scraps and hoped to be the missing spark that made organics collection and composting possible. I also didn't notice that there was a pun there on ripe, because sometimes food scraps can be a little smelly. As of August 1st, 2018, ScrapDogs was up to 25 clients, including both residential and restaurants. The two quickly realized they were running out of space as well as carbon-rich material to balance their influx of food scraps. At the same time, Boley Farm, an 80-head dairy farm in Washington, Maine, was considering options for hiring out hauling services for a brand new composting business they had started with the help of a Mitchell Center project. And they were working with me and students and our trash team materials management group. The two businesses and me came to the realization they were each a vital piece of an important puzzle. The barriers they were facing are key reasons why rural areas across the U.S. and Maine struggle to connect farms and food scraps. Connor and Alexis of Boley Farm could not effectively become a hauler, servicing a wide range of customers on top of managing the demands of a dairy farm and a newborn infant. Davis and Tessa could not keep up with their hauling, marketing, production, and education goals if they needed to take on the endeavor of owning a farm that would generate enough manure to serve the area's needs. So ScrapDogs Community Compost and Boley Farm is a partnership of necessity, convenience, and common goals. The Midcoast Composting Cooperative is proof that commercial household food scrap composting operations can happen at regionally sized scale. Having been awarded 2 Maine Department of Environmental Protection grants for diverting materials away from landfills, Davis and Tessa now have over 200 clients and are here today to share their insights about composting and hauling industry, their role in enhancing sustainability, and their quest for enriching their community's discussion on how to best manage uneaten food. Please warmly welcome Davis and Tessa.
Not as embarrassing as it could have been.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Travis.
And thank you for having us. This is really wonderful to see so many people in this room who are interested in trash. We love trash, which you'll come to find through this presentation, I think. And I think we're just going to dive in.
Yeah, let's get started.
So this is our long title, Navigating the Second, Third, and Fourth Lives of Organic Wastes, Food, Circular Food Systems, and Curbside Compost. So hopefully we will touch on all of this successfully in the next 40 slides. Our first one is easy. We already had an introduction, but very briefly, Davis and I met where you guys are now in college when we were learning about all the horrible things that happen in the food and waste industries, and we're passionate enough to try to fix it. And that, as Travis explained, brought us here to Maine and helped us start ScrapDogs Community Compost.
Yeah, there's sort of a longer pathway through settling in on compost is something we were more interested in. We actually thought we were going to make recycling bins for a while.
We made recycling bins. We were going to do signage. We were just going to be a consultancy and do waste characterization stuff. We had an app.
Yeah, we did a lot of different stuff before kind of figuring out that maybe New York City wasn't so great for us, and that coming back to Maine where we could really feel part of the community, as Travis mentioned, was really important to us.
So without further ado, what exactly is ScrapDogs? So we're a for-profit business. We operate generally in order to collect food waste and turn it into compost. The biggest part of our business is our pickup operation. So we do curbside pickups across the midcoast, so from Belfast down to Thomaston, if anyone's familiar with the coast. It's about 260 square miles, or maybe a little more, if I did my math right. In comparison to other businesses like us, which do exist, we are much more rural, so we cover more distance per pickup, and it also therefore costs us a little bit more per pickup. That said, part of us coming here and trying to do it was to prove that we could do it, so that a similar operation can be used elsewhere, and models can grow and expand and franchise maybe, or at least be copied elsewhere. Yeah.
So in addition to our pickup model, we have one drop-off location at Midcoast Solid Waste where our subscribers can drop off a bucket, pick up a clean bucket, instead of having us come to their house. It's a means of cutting out some of the excess transportation that it would take to get to their house, and streamlining it with their recycling that they do anyway at the transfer station. So this drop-off location has actually been the fastest growing part of our business since we started it. It continues to be, and regularly processes is a site where we collect 1.5 or more tons of material a month. Once we've collected everything from our pickups and our drop-off location, we take it out to Bole Farm, which Travis mentioned is that very kind of magical partnership that happened as a result of our being interested in waste and the McDonald's overlapping interest to start a compost operation at their dairy farm. It's about 20 miles from where we live in the center of our pickup density, but is perfectly situated with enough manure to help build the right recipes for our compost mix.
So once all the material is brought by us to Bole, it's all mixed together. The McDonald's have an excavator and a tractor that they use to mix all the material together and then regularly turn it to aerate it and make sure it's properly mixed. That material is comprised of the food waste that we collect, which is mostly household waste. We also collect from some larger clients. We collect from the guy who makes tofu in Maine, which is pretty cool. We collect from a winery. So there are a couple larger feedstocks or sources that we bring to our piles that are more specific, but largely it's a general food waste mix. We mix that with the manure, of course, the magical manure, and wood products, so either like wood mulch or sawdust, and that balances out the nutrient content and chemical balance of our piles, and that's what makes compost. It takes about 8 weeks or so of active turning and composting to bring the pile to what you would recognize as compost, and then we allow it to cure for at least 4 months to make sure that all of the chemical processes are mostly complete, and it's not going to, have adverse effects where it's placed in gardens and such. So about 6 months overall processing time.
Once it's been finished, that compost then is returned to our subscribers. So some of the folks who pay on a monthly basis to have to come to their house, or it's sold to folks in the community who've heard about us, maybe compost in their backyard, but would like nice finished compost for their garden. We screen it down to 1/2 inch or through a 1/2 inch screen, usually what commercial composters are looking for in terms of application, and we deliver that in our relatively new to us diesel dump truck by the yard, or by the half yard is what each customer is entitled to as part of their subscription.
We often get the question whether we bag our compost. We do not right now. It requires further screening and also a bagging machine, which is a large investment and a big operation. So we're not yet there, but maybe someday.
Yeah, one of the things we've considered doing that's more of a low-cost product application is putting a finished compost back into our buckets, which we already use for collection, and having people pay a deposit for them if they're sold at locations other than just people's houses.
All right, so now we're going to kind of orient ourselves in the grand world of waste. there was this amazing study done right here at Maine by these
Incredible people.
Yeah, we greatly admire these people. That kind of showed what the makeup of Maine's waste is. As you can see here, organic waste, which is food and other biodegradable products, is a vast majority of what people are throwing out. Municipal solid waste is like what the public makes for trash, what average Joes throw in their trash bins. And then 26% is paper waste, which a large amount of that is also biodegradable. So certainly more than half could be made into compost or could be considered organic waste. So, situating that in this big industry that is waste, this slide is kind of just to give you an idea of how massive the waste industry actually is. And this is from 2001, so presumably it has grown since then. It's been a minute. But just some quick numbers, there are over 27,000 organizations who are dealing with processing waste right now. Sorry, in 2001. More than half of those are publicly owned and operated. But 76% of the total profits, which total $43 billion, come from the private companies, so it's kind of a balance, as you can expect. It employed over 367,000 people in 2001, and over half of them were only hauling businesses, so only people who were transporting waste from place to place. And in 2001, this is insane, 0.5% of US GDP was the waste industry. So think about all of the things that we create in this world. Obviously, they have to go to waste. So I guess it makes sense. So what comprises all of that waste? In 2017, according to the EPA, more than half of that was stuff that went to landfill. 13% was incinerated, 25% recycled, and 10% composted. And I believe that includes digestion as well, which we'll get into. But as you can see, and as you probably know, this is not the ideal pie chart that we would like to see here. I would like to see it a little more green. So trying to consider what those balances are and why the pie chart looks like this even today when I like to think we know that composting is a better option, which we'll also get into.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we know compost is a better option than landfilling or incineration is because landfills are an incredibly large source of methane. They're the third largest human-related source of methane in the US, at least, and accounted for 14% of our emissions, carbon equivalent emissions in 2017. So when you think about how waste is managed, a lot of the impacts associated with getting rid of it come from the methane emissions within a landfill. But incineration also produces a significant amount of CO2, as well as does wastewater treatment plant. Some of these numbers down here are the totals for CO2 equivalents in the US, I believe from 2017 as well. Composting is an alternative to landfilling and incineration, obviously. Instead of burning or burying our trash, we can make it into a viable product and avoid some of the emissions that would be associated with either of those two processes. In terms of thinking about community compost as a sustainable option, we took the time to go through some of the emissions of our own operation and comparing compost and landfilling, incineration, and digestion just based on CO2 emissions. Compost is an aerobic process. It produces CO2 instead of methane. Part of the processing stores about 15 to 50% of the carbon that goes through that process. Landfills store more than 50%. What causes the difference in emissions there is that most of the emissions from landfills are in methane, and all of the emissions in compost, at least in theory, if you're doing the processes correctly, are CO2. Incineration, because you're oxidizing all the material, only is about less than 1% of the carbon in that final product that then is landfilled and could be considered fossil carbon. The rest of it is emitted as CO2. So in building a model to think about emissions, we use this IPCC flow chart of carbon to analyze where is carbon going in these processes, and how does it inform our decision about what to do with material, and whether or not community compost in a rural setting is the most sustainable option for waste management.
So like David said, we went through some of the other things involved in our composting operation that emit harmful gases into the atmosphere. This is our dog, Rhubarb. She's our boss. So the major, most obvious other source of emissions that our business includes is from our transportation. So like, 50% of all waste businesses, we have, well, really 100%, we have to cart our waste. So we use a small pickup truck. We have to consider what the emissions are from that, related to a giant dump truck, related to a real garbage truck, how much it carries. Davis very amazingly did all of those numbers for you, which you'll see in a bit. But it's something to take into account when you're operating any business or operation. You got to figure out what your hauling impacts are.
Yeah, and whether or not you can assume that us being a compost truck out on the road is going to take another vehicle that would otherwise be hauling trash off of the road, or if it's just an additional vehicle that would increase emissions associated with processing the waste.
Right, and that gets into the question of what scale we're operating at. So right now we're such a small scale organization, we probably haven't kicked anyone else off the road yet, but maybe we're going to.
Yeah, but the one thing we are doing is getting more dense in terms of our transportation. So the amount of emissions per yard of food waste we collect reduces the more people we can put onto our route. So we'll talk a little bit more as we go further on about sort of what the line is in terms of being the most effective management strategy for food waste, in terms of how many yards of food waste you need to collect per miles you travel.
So, transportation emissions. But there are also emissions associated with the materials that we use. So, luckily, we are a pretty simple operation, all things considered. We don't need a lot of infrastructure and materials. But what we do use are plastic buckets and plastic containers, which obviously require fossil fuel extraction and processing and creation of those materials, takes energy, creates emissions, etc. Are these materials that otherwise wouldn't be needed if people were just putting everything in their bags? Something to consider. Other things, we do have other equipment besides our trucks. We have the excavator and the skid steer and the tractor that are at the dairy farm that are involved in our operations. We own a power washer. We used a screener to screen our compost. And we have a couple other things that we probably could include. Like it says, are these additional inputs, or do they replace those things that are required to make other waste products or process other waste? And then, because we have this final product that we then sell and distribute, we have to take that into account as well. Davis mentioned our beautiful truck, whose name is Clifford. We have to drive the truck. We have to operate the truck as a dump truck. All of this takes quite a bit of energy and creates emissions as well. 5 miles in our dump truck for every customer is not, it's a pretty substantial amount of time and energy spent.
Specifically just to deliver the compost back.
Correct.
So every spring and fall, when our customers request their compost back that they're entitled to, part of our business model makes sure that they get that as a guarantee.
Right.
So the additional 1,000 miles, give or take, per year that we have to serve all of our customers adds on to the overall emissions of our included in transportation.
And then, those small, tiny, everyday business operations, plugging our laptop into the wall, that energy was created by emitting quite a bit as well. Print and marketing materials, envelopes, etc. So there's a lot that goes into any kind of operation, and composting doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah. So when we start to compare compost or our composting operation to a landfill, we used a rough model that we're collecting approximately 14 and a quarter yards of material every month. If we assume that that material were going to landfill, and 50% of the carbon that went to a landfill were then released as methane, the comparative emissions between our operation and the landfill would mean that we're a little under 4 times as efficient with our CO2 emissions. So we'd have to be 4 times as emitting in order to emit as much as a landfill. As in, it's very difficult. Very, very difficult for us to travel so much that we emit more than a landfill would as part of our operations. The same thing relatively with incineration. Although incineration is sometimes touted as a renewable resource because you're making electricity, you still are creating a bunch of CO2 in that process because 99% of the carbon is converted into CO2. And then whatever is left is landfilled as ash. But with 99% of the carbon going to an incinerator, you can assume that you're still producing more emissions just in terms of processing that material at an incinerator than you would if you took it to a composter, because a composter will store 15 to 50% of that carbon in their pile instead of emitting all of it as a gas. Another thing to think about in terms of composting versus incineration, in this, at least in Maine, the incinerators here don't like food waste. They want to push it out of their management. So Eco Maine, where a lot of the material in our service area is actually destined, is trying to prevent food waste from getting to their facility. So they'll either refer us or talk to us about some of their municipalities as a means of reducing the amount of moisture content in their burn. Because it's more efficient for them to have a bunch of plastic and paper that is dry and increases temperatures in their incinerator than having a bunch of food waste.
In fact, they even have a grant program for schools who want to compost. So they are actively investing in reducing food waste that goes to.
Yeah. Digestion was probably a hot topic around here. Did Orono transition to fiberite recently?
Yeah.
Yes, to coastal resources. Cool. Okay. Digesters are touted as sustainable, renewable energy resources because they also make energy. Depending on the method of management, though, their emissions vary quite considerably. If any of you are looking for a really good project as a student or as research, understanding nitrous oxide emissions that are as a result of the digestion methods and how manure is stored prior to digestion, or how digestion is managed after digestion. There are a number of different impacts associated with those two inputs into a digestion system that drastically change the amount of nitrous oxide emitted at that process. And nitrous oxide is 298 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. So considering that pollutant is really important in the process of figuring out what's more sustainable composting and digestion. The same thing could be said of composters as well. I mentioned previously in a slide, but didn't talk about it that much. Methane and nitrous oxide could also be a potential pollutant that are from compost piles if the piles aren't managed correctly. Nitrous oxide, forgive me if I'm getting too much in the weeds right now. Nitrous oxide is a result of aerobic nitrogen that then becomes anaerobic in the nitrification process. So in digestion, which is an intentionally anaerobic process, nitrous oxide is inherent in that process because you're taking aerobic material, making it anaerobic, burning it, creating methane and then burning it. So you're either emitting nitrous oxide as part of that digestion process or when you're burning the biogas from it. Regardless, so if you give digesters the benefit of the doubt, say they capture all of their nitrous oxide, and you're just talking about CO2 and everybody's doing the way they're supposed to, digesters might actually be better in terms of managing the emissions associated with their management process. They have fewer labor inputs as opposed to like a big windrow composter like us. They can capture some of that gas and run their facility. So you're looking mostly at the CO2 emissions associated with burning that gas they create. But again, it totally is different depending on each digester and their process. Is this me or you?
I think it's you.
Cool. Okay,
Yeah.
so then also, if we're talking about compost generally, why not just do it in your backyard? So many people say this, hey, actually when we were starting our business, all of our friends in New York were like, no one in Maine is going to do that. They all compost in their backyard
They all
already.
have 80 acres to compost on themselves.
Everyone has so much space. Turns out that's, not exactly the case. Although it would be great if everybody composted in their backyard.
And we say that to every person who mentions it to us.
Yeah,
That
if you're
is the
already
preferred
composting in your backyard, you can avoid all the transportation emissions, and you can manage that pile correctly instead of,
And you get a gold star.
turning it into a big pile of big grass that then becomes anaerobic. There are a lot of other things associated with it. But assuming everybody does it right, yes. Awesome. The thing is, most people don't do that. And creating a business to increase access to compost in areas where waste is being landfilled or incinerated is better in terms of managing the emissions associated with that food waste. So you're definitely going to win on emissions if it's going to go to a landfill or an incinerator anyway. So to solidify some of the more nebulous math that I was doing, the model I created to show sort of what we were doing and some of our associated emissions just outlines on the very top row what the emissions associated with processing 14.25 yards of food waste would be for us, a landfill, an incinerator, a digester, and backyard compost. So assuming that the digester is working at full capacity, they may actually beat us in terms of managing their emissions. Same thing with backyard compost, although backyard compost won't scale. So you won't necessarily capture all that material and it'll go into landfill or an incinerator regardless. So why aren't we a digester? There are a couple of reasons. One is that it's a lot of money, but besides that, there are some other benefits associated with composting that we think are really important and kind of outline the way of thinking about sustainability as an intersectional issue that I think everyone is relatively interested in looking in terms of system reform. So I think Tessa will get into a little bit more of that.
So, when thinking about any kind of system or project, there are obviously a million other impacts of that project, and like Davis said, luckily, a lot of the impacts of a compost operation are generally positive, particularly in regards to emissions and other environmentally related topics. One of the major benefits of compost operations that use manure is that we are not only using the food waste as a resource, but we are stabilizing that manure, which would otherwise, similar to a very anaerobic food waste pile, would be producing a ton of nitrous oxide, right? VOCs and other pollutants, especially if it is not managed correctly. Oftentimes farmers will, for organic fertilization of their farms, use their own manure to spread on their fields. Even that releases quite a bit of emissions. So by composting that material, we're able to capture a lot of those nutrients and reduce a lot of those emissions all in one, and fix all of that nitrogen, which is great. Another major benefit of composting that most people think of when they think of using compost as a product is improving soil health and structure. So building nutrient capacity of soil so that it can retain more nutrients for growth. It invigorates plant growth by allowing for reduced aeration and water perforation of the soil. It supports a greater, more biodiverse ecosystem in the soil itself and above it. It resists erosion, which, especially if you're familiar with conventional farming, has been a major issue in the history of our agriculture. And it allows for greater carbon sequestration from the atmosphere. So oftentimes we think of forests as the major carbon sequestering force in the world, but soil itself is able to bring in more carbon from the atmosphere than you think. And by improving soil structure, composting allows soil to sequester more carbon. And like I said, it promotes plant growth. It allows roots to grow and solidify the soil and maintain an increasing amount of biomass in the soil. Provides better access to oxygen, to water, and to nutrients. So because the roots are able to perforate more, they're able to take up more. And also better soil translates to better temperature modification. So rather than having larger temperature fluctuations, better soil structure is able to ease it out, which makes for better plant growth. And also disease, at least dampening, if not eradication, is a major benefit of compost. In fact, there are a lot of projects and research attempts going on right now to prove the extent to which composting can reduce contamination and eliminate different diseases, which is pretty cool. So it goes for plants as well. Your plants will be less susceptible to disease and also pests. And in doing all of this, composting allows for farmers and growers to use fewer chemicals in order to grow their plants or whatever they're growing. It can be used in place of many conventional fertilizers, which improves the soil environment for the plants. Instead of directly feeding the plant nutrients, which is what conventional fertilizers do, it's able to build an ecosystem around the plant that is compatible for more nutrient uptake, like I said, and supporting more biodiversity leads to larger nutrient content. And conventional fertilizers can often disrupt those bio webs and microbial balances, which allow for greater growth. Also, composting reduces the need for various pesticides, like I said. Also, fun fact, many conventional fertilizers are derived from petroleum-based products. So in a way, if you're using compost, you're reducing the amount you have to extract, or at least on a large scale. Just a quick hat tip to organic agriculture. Obviously, organic agriculture is very in love with, if not dependent on, compost as a method of replacing these conventional fertilizers. And as probably you all know, the organic agriculture industry has been thriving. Organic sales have reached a record $49.4 billion in 2017. More operations are opening around the world, particularly in developed countries. But there is a lot of research into how organic farming can be conducive to supporting developing countries as well, and specifically providing better food stability for developing communities. And what else do I have on here? Because these farmers would not be investing in conventional fertilizers and other chemical compounds, they would be able to invest more in their farms and not have to have those same upfront costs. And it also offers new employment opportunities, which is great. So I'm not saying that compost is responsible for all of these amazing things that the entire organic farming industry is and is able to accomplish, but I'm saying it's a piece of it. And I will say that, of course, there are limitations to organic farming and to compost being used in all of these situations. Conventional fertilizers were created for a reason, and there's a lot of studies about what the yields are comparatively between compost-grown plants and traditional fertilizer-grown plants. That said, most of those studies take into account immediate growth. So when you're, shooting plants full of great nitrogen and that's easily accessible, great, it's going to grow very quickly. That said, without taking into account all those extra benefits of composting, creating soil structure and better biodiverse systems and providing for longer-term nutrient uptake, then it's hard to really compare. All right, we're going to shift a little bit.
So, as the slide mentions, we've been talking about a lot about compost or food waste as compost is a means of recycling food waste. But can we look at food waste more from one further lens away from the issue and think about if we can manage it any more effectively than just having one specific place or process to manage all of it. One of the things we'd like to do as a company is consider ourselves more of an organic waste management service rather than just a composter, because it opens up so many other options for us in terms of diverting food scraps to better uses and potentially fewer emissions or more resources available for our community.
So some of you might have seen this upside-down pyramid before. It was created as a means of trying to understand what the priorities are in terms of managing food waste. So obviously reducing food waste at the top, but then before composting or creating energy out of it, it obviously suggests that you should try to continue using it as food if possible. And I love this pyramid because it takes into account the fact that food in particular is such an intersectional thing. It is inherently wrapped up in so many pieces of our culture and our economy, and I think by getting at this idea, it allows, like Dave said, a lot of opportunities for creative use of food waste. So for us, we've thought a lot about how can we make these products, or these resources, if you will, into products that could feed people. I mentioned that we collect from the local tofu guy. This is the material we'll collect. It's called okara. It's like soybean meal, and it's often used as a protein source for people and for animals. We collect a lot of it, and we have long dreamed of turning it into a product, either dehydrating it and turning it into a protein powder, which people do in Japan, or turning it into dog biscuits, which would be very on brand for us, or making some other creative use of it that could minimize the amount of time and labor that we put into composting and even more easily make it accessible as a resource to people. That's one example. And then feeding animals comes below feeding people, which makes sense. This photo is not ours, unfortunately, although the McDonald's do have some chickens who poke around. This is taken at the Vermont Composting Company, which is, we all admire it because it was one of the earliest large-scale community compost operations that succeeded and continues to succeed and thrive. And it is a typical open-air composting system, but what's so incredible about it is that its employees largely are these chickens who do a lot of the breaking down and feed themselves in the process. So not only can we just use some of these food waste products to feed animals, we know a lot of pig farmers who collect food waste as well, but we can integrate animals into a composting or general food waste management system in more creative ways and solve more problems.
We can also get creative with some of the benefits of compost as a process. So digesters capture energy by turning into methane and then burning the methane. You can also capture heat from a compost pile. If we have to manage the temperature of the piles, or the McDonald's do, at around 150 degrees for several consecutive days, and it turns into being weeks. If you could harness that energy, that heat, you could potentially heat the McDonald's house, or if done in other applications, heat another surrounding building.
Or a generator.
Or a generator, or use some food waste to have a somewhat ground source heat pump where you extract the heat from a compost pile during the winter. There are a bunch of different ways of looking at that resource that is food waste and capturing that energy. One of the other things that we're really interested in doing too, though, is using our route, where we currently pick up food waste, and delivering food back to people, and closing the loop with our network of farmers that we know in the local area, and bringing food directly to people's doors. Potentially eliminating the number of trips they make to the grocery store, and keeping a couple of cars, or at least a couple of trips off the road. Some of the math I did on this is that if we were to serve our 200 customers and eliminate the number of trips they made to the grocery store, which you can assume is probably somewhere around 4 miles there and back for all of our 200 customers, we'd have emissions that are equal or less than that of a digester, by reducing the amount of cars that are on the road as a result of going to the grocery store. Or say if we're not going to eliminate the number of times people go to the grocery store, if we were just to cut the number of times people go to the grocery store in half by delivering food to them and serve 400 people, we'd have the same CO2 equivalents there in terms of making ourselves a more sustainable option in terms of our carbon emissions associated with the operations we have. General side note, I forgot to mention this earlier, but if you're thinking about rural compost management and what it takes to drive that route, if you want to be better than an incinerator, like the, I'd say next best thing after composting, you have to drive less than 129 miles per yard of food waste you collect. So you can still drive quite a significant amount of distance collecting small bits of food waste before you're worse than an incinerator in terms of your emissions. So if that's the waste management process that you're trying to get ahead of in terms of emissions, you've got quite a bit of leeway in terms of looking at your emissions from a sustainability perspective. Yeah, so I think building on that last slide, what we're really trying to do at ScrapDogs to reduce emissions, but also think comprehensively about our food system, is to close the loop on waste production and make sure that people see our resources as part of the same system. Composting is an essential piece of that, which isn't necessarily true for many of the other waste management practices that we've considered in the emissions scheme and model that I developed.
That's all we've got. Thank you.
We have about 5-10 minutes where we'd love to hear questions from all of you. And in the spirit of Linda, I especially encourage the students to ask them about how this relates to activities you might be able to do in classes, or just general ideas you have. So, any questions?
What if you used the new electric trucks that are coming out, instead, assuming that you had green resources for the electricity, wouldn't that ultimately increase the mileage you could do?
Yes.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. The question was, why don't we use electrical vehicles?
Or what it would do to utilize, how would it impact your model?
How would it impact our emissions, particularly? The answer is we would love to do that and hope to do that in the future. It's a large upfront financial investment to do so, as most renewable energy systems are currently, or alternative energy systems. But yeah, we would love to do that.
When we were first starting up, Tessa and I were looking for electric trucks. They don't usually have the mileage, at least for that class of vehicle, yet.
And also towing capacity. So you saw kind of a picture of our big dump trailer that we have. That's why we have such a big dump truck, so that we can also pull our dump trailer. So those vehicles are not yet at that point where they can tow quite the amount that we need them to maintain our own kind of personal energy efficiency and time efficiency.
I think and just like if we want to pull up that here, we can go back to this model spreadsheet of somewhat rough numbers. The emissions from transportation they improve per yard of material if you have larger capacity. So and are also determined by your vehicle efficiency. So one of the reasons why I put similar or greater for landfills and digesters is I'm assuming the fuel efficiency of those vehicles they're using is about a quarter that we use. So we get about 22 miles per gallon out of our Toyota Tacoma. Big garbage truck gets, Toyota Tacomas are great. You get about 5 or 5.5 for a big garbage truck with a 30-yard container. And to fill that with food waste, you have to travel much further distances. So
talks to the scaling issue of getting at the right amount, the right size vehicle for the right amount of materials you go.
Totally.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that cow manure is the superior medium for composting. You guys clearly agree. I've heard that there are constraints on supply. So like if you were one day able to scale up throughout the state, is there enough supply, or what would be a second best medium?
That is an excellent question. Obviously, we are in such an amazing place right now because it's so. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. The question was, manure, especially cow manure, is awesome for composting, but resources are obviously limited. And not to get into the dairy industry, but probably some of you know that the dairy industry is having not the easiest time right now in Maine and elsewhere. So, is there opportunity for growth where that resource is limited? I think it's definitely an issue. I think there are a lot of smaller scale, if not cow farms, horse farms, and the way we were taught, horse manure is actually the best for composting, but most manures will operate. But cow manure is so great because it's produced on such a large scale. So I think it's a valid question, and we don't quite know the answer yet. I think there are other dairy farms of Connor and Alexis's scale that are not yet utilizing their manure. But anything larger is definitely going to be tough to find.
Yeah, I also would argue that manure is not necessary for compost. You really just need to manage your carbon and nitrogen ratio. So we could potentially just use some nitrogenous food waste, like the commercial waste we pick up from the tofu processor, and mix that with the carbonad. The real trick is making sure that there's like microbial activity within the material. So if you inoculate it with maybe a couple spoonfuls of your finished compost, you can start that process going along. Maybe not as quickly, but as effectively.
Do you think it would be better system to run a community composting system simultaneously with a digester?
The question was...
Or would they be too much competing against each other, or would they increase the amount of resources captured and decrease the emissions from waste?
Sure, yeah. So, question is, would it be better to partner a community compost operation with a digester, or is that sort of in competition with compost? So, the reason why we aren't a digester is because of all of these like additional things we believe that compost does for our economy. We like really think it's great for agriculture, putting in our gardens. It's also a value add in terms of our business. We bring that compost back to our subscribers because that's what they're looking for. I think one of the biggest value adds we have for people is that we annually are going to give them something they can put back in their garden that they know is going to do good things for their veggies or for their front yard. That said, if you're looking at a potentially different business model and you're just managing waste, having a small-scale digester could be a good idea.
I mean, if we were to have a facility that we could run off of a small digester while also composting on the side, I think there would be opportunities to pair them creatively, but I do think you would run into the issue of competing interests for the two.
I guess to clarify a little bit, what I was thinking is, would it be ideal to run a community composting system in the Orono and Greater Bangor area while our trash is being sent to fiber technology? Would it be beneficial to still run a community compost system that tries to recover as much food waste as possible, and then whatever isn't captured by that system is then sent through a digester?
Oh, okay, yes. So in this context,
Yes.
Is it better to send everything to coastal resources or Fiberite where it is digested, or does it to divert it as a compost? I'd say it depends on your value orientation and what you believe is the most effective use or end use of that material. So as it comes to scale, so if you're thinking about a community compost operation as a means of sustaining a community garden, or being a means of interacting with a diverse number of community members to produce something that will help you build your garden, like build out your veggie plot or whatever you're growing, that could be a competitive rationale for diverting food scraps that would otherwise go to a digester where they're managed at scale relatively effectively.
And not to be annoying about it, but I always think about how really, in the grand scheme of things, the fact that 52% of all of our waste is still landfilled, anything we can do that is reducing the amount of food waste going to landfill or doing something creative and productive and environmentally great with it, do it. Don't worry about, this is me not being a business person, don't worry about competition yet. Do what you can, and I think that's, up to a certain point will still be effective.
You got time for one more question, Tim?
Just wondering if I imagine that most of your subscribers are individuals, and I'm wondering if you've considered, or if there are possibilities for working with a municipality so that you can sort of standardize and get more scale yourself. What would that be like?
So the question was, assuming most of our customers are individuals, how could we work with municipalities? You're right, the majority of our subscribers are individuals. We also work with businesses and schools and nonprofits and offices, and we have that drop-off site at our local municipality. That's our major municipal collaboration right now, and it filled the niche with Travis's help. We were able to fill the niche there where they were not able to divert the food waste elsewhere. There are a growing number of municipal composting operations, particularly in large urban areas. So San Francisco, New York City is building theirs, that are pretty effective, particularly in the density aspect. And that transition is a lot easier. This is kind of goes without saying, but it's easier in places where curbside pickup is already happening, which in a lot of rural areas it's not. Many rural areas operate on the transfer station model, so a lot of people already cart their own waste to a centralized spot. So in many cases, in terms of our business, maybe in our one dream scenario, it would be bought out by a municipality. It makes it a little trickier when they have to invest in the infrastructure to do that, and wouldn't necessarily be more efficient or environmentally friendly when you consider that added requirement of driving everywhere when you didn't have to before.
Another part of this other drop-off model that we have, though, is that we have a free drop off that the transfer station pays for, or the municipalities pay for, because our tipping fee is less than that it would be to take it to the incinerator. So in some cases, we are cost competitive, and municipalities like working with us because we have another end product that we're working with, and it's not necessarily something we're not doing. That's a lot of negatives. We're trying to expand that operation.
Yes, but not necessarily a municipal curbside pickup somewhere it doesn't already exist.
So before we exit out, if you have more questions, please feel free to come and talk to Dave and Tessa. I go to the Penobscot Theater pretty frequently, and they always end off the opening that you are the greatest form of advertisement. So if you know anyone that lives in the midcoast area, if you go to restaurants or business there, ask them, do you compost your food scraps? Put the social pressure on the businesses to encourage them to do better with their food scraps by working with a great company like ScrapDogs. Thank you all for your time and attention. We give them another round of applause. And